Welcome to the Capital News. I am your host, Alex Karitis. Today is July 24th, 2019. Thank you so much for joining me. A couple stories we're going to talk about today is, of course, the circus that took place this morning and this afternoon down in Washington, D.C. Of course, I'm talking about the special prosecutor Bob Mueller, his testimony before Congress. Pretty much of a nothing burger. It really wasn't that exciting. Not that I was expecting it to be exciting, but it just wasn't. We've been hearing the same story from the Democrats and from the Republicans for the past 2.5 years. What did anybody think was going to come of this? I mean, the promotion of all of it, the hype of all of it was better than the event. It's like selling the Super Bowl. It's fantastic and all the marketing and all the hype, but then the game day and it's a big dud. That happens more times than not. That's exactly what took place today. I don't even know if Bob Mueller knew where he was during some of the questioning. I mean, but in fairness to Bob Mueller, there was a tight schedule as far as how much time each member of the committee had to ask Mr. Mueller questions. They had about 5 minutes. Chairman Jerry Nadler kept strict rules. He kept to that timeline. And so most of the congressmen and women were taking their time to grandstand to make their points. And so Bob Mueller, he couldn't really even answer a lot of them. And a lot of the questions that he did answer was simply on the back of, well, just read the report. So why were we wasting even more time with this? But we're going to go into it a little bit more. And then the other thing we're going to talk about today is Market Mania, which is also the title of today's podcast, because the S&P 500 along with the Nasdaq have hit all-time record highs once again. The Dow not so lucky today, but we're going to get into that a little bit later on today's episode. But kickstarting here with the Mueller testimony, the real crux of everything, the real question now that remains is, are the investigators going to be investigated? Now, that's something that the president has been talking about. That's something that the Republicans want to see happen. One of the congressmen on the committee is Jim Jordan of Ohio. And he's saying, well, there's some good news on all of this because according to Congressman Jordan, Attorney General Bill Barr is doing just that. He, along with some other U.S. attorneys, are investigating the investigators that kickstarted this whole Russia mania. This whole investigation into Donald Trump, his campaign, his administration. And what came of it? Nothing. We have a report. We have 2 volumes. The first one had to deal with conspiracy. I know the word out there is collusion, but that's not a legal term. That was even discussed today by Bob Mueller. It's conspiracy. There was no conspiracy. However, Bob Mueller did state that the Russians did want Donald Trump to win. They were hoping that Donald Trump would win. So whoever scores points for that, okay, whatever you want to say. The United States of America meddles in elections all over the world. We care. We prefer if certain people get elected. So is that any surprise? I mean, you know, it's all outward looking. Nobody ever wants to look internally and say, how can we fix our problems? It's always somebody else's fault. And we talk about that here all the time, whether somebody wants to blame the Chinese or the Mexicans or the illegal immigrants. It's always somebody else's fault. It's never our failed policies. It's never anything we do wrong. We can meddle, we can stage coups covertly and overtly, but nobody else can meddle with us. It's not right for other people to mess with us. It's not right for us to mess with other countries either. That's the point. It's the double standard. But my question with all of this still remains. Are there investigations with Hillary Clinton? And I know some of you are like, oh, come on, with Hillary Clinton. Hey, to an extent, I'm with you. I'm tired of hearing her name too. And of course, like we predicted, her name was brought up many times over today by the Republicans because there are legitimate questions. Because the Democrats, and they must have had a team meeting before kickoff and said, one of the key phrases that we're all going to say is, no one is above the law. Now, I don't know if this was sort of a jab at Tom Fitton, the president of Judicial Watch, because that's their motto, no one is above the law. And Tom Fitton and Judicial Watch have been all over this. I mean, if you take to social media, especially Twitter, Tom Fitton and Judicial Watch are all over the place talking about the wrongdoings of the Obama administration and Hillary Clinton and all of that, and kick in this entire investigation into Donald Trump and company. So I don't know if they were digging him or if this was just what they thought was a smart statement to say collectively as Team Democrats. No one is above the law. I think this is going to come full circle on them. At least I hope it does, because we have to understand the genesis of all of this. And we've had many podcasts on this over the course of several months. So I'm not going to bore you with all the details of it. But where's Hillary Clinton in all of this? Where's Fusion GPS in all of this? The opposition research consultancy. Where's the Steele dossier? And of course, these were some questions posed to Bob Mueller in this morning's testimony, again by Jim Jordan and others. But Jim Jordan asked a very straightforward question. We're trying to get to the heart of this. We're trying to understand the genesis of this investigation, how it all started. And what was Bob Mueller's response? Well, that wasn't within our purview, which makes absolutely no sense to me whatsoever. I mean, I'm not an attorney. I'm not an insider within the Department of Justice. Not that one would necessarily have to be to understand all of that, but I'm just saying this is not my forte. But for Bob Mueller to say that wasn't within our purview, that's, to me, a little ridiculous, because how can you not be interested in the genesis of the investigation? Was it tainted? Was there some other political motive? Was there some other conspiracy within our own government, then being the Obama administration? Were there some bad apples within our intelligence community, the NSA, the CIA, the FBI, and perhaps others? I mean, those are some serious questions, folks. I mean, it's the job of the government to rid out corruption. Now, I know that's laughable with how corrupt everything is, but that's what they're supposed to do. That's what the FBI is supposed to do. That's what special prosecutors are allegedly supposed to do. They're supposed to find corruption and expose it and prosecute it. So where was the Obama administration in all of this? Because one of the questions and one of the other characters in this saga is the gentleman Joseph Mifsud. Okay, Joseph Mifsud allegedly kickstarted a lot of this, because you have to remember the other name, George Papadopoulos. He was an advisor to the Trump campaign. If you listen to the mainstream media, you would believe that this was Donald Trump's right-hand man. Donald Trump barely knew the guy, if at all. I mean, he was, I think, an advisor with some energy policy. I mean, just a guy trying to make a name for himself, trying to get in on a political campaign, and trying to see where he can, maybe make a career out of something. That's all this guy was. He got caught up in all of this stuff, and you have this Joseph Mifsud character, who is, by some reports, connected with some foreign intelligence agencies. Allegedly, some sort of professor. I believe he's from Malta, so I guess that makes him a Maltese poodle of some sort. But here is a guy who kickstarts this, kind of casts a line out there, hooks Papadopoulos. Papadopoulos thinking, well, I can make a name for myself here. We get some dirt on Hillary Clinton, and boom, you get a phone call to the FBI, and the FBI starts investigating Papadopoulos and some other characters within the Trump campaign. What about Mifsud? Papadopoulos lied to the FBI. He served prison time. Who knows how outrageous his legal bills were? What about Mifsud? Because according to Jim Jordan in his questioning, Mifsud was questioned, and he also lied to the FBI, but the FBI did not prosecute him. He did not spend a day in jail. So why not? These are some serious questions. If you're going to say the genesis of the report is important, and you go to Papadopoulos, but you don't go to the guy who informed Papadopoulos, and that guy also lied to you, Joseph Mifsud, something's fishy. Something's real strange here. And so you have to go right back full circle to the Democrats. No one is above the law. So why is Joseph Mifsud off the hook? Why is Hillary Clinton and company off the hook? Because what they did just on the public record is a crime. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. And while there may be a Department of Justice, a DOJ precedent that says, well, you cannot indict a sitting president of the United States, There was no such claim on a sitting Secretary of State, and there most definitely was not such a statute or regulation within the Department of Justice that says you can't go after a former Secretary of State, and of course, again, that being Hillary Clinton. They destroyed 33,000 emails. They physically destroyed BlackBerries. They crushed them with hammers. I mean, come on. Who does this? This is like Pablo Escobar flushing cocaine down the toilet and saying, yeah, we know he did it, but we're not going to prosecute him. That's what she did. She destroyed evidence. That in and of itself is obstruction of justice. And she's walking like a free bird. Two-tier justice system. Meanwhile, you have a country that is growing more and more divided, and this isn't helping. Not one bit. And this was another exercise in wasteful government spending, right before they go on vacation, nonetheless. Sayonara, see you later. Not like these people are working for us anyway. I mean, what did they just recently pass? The only thing they got together on was to increase the debt ceiling. It was the only thing. There was maybe the hope of some slowdown in spending. A slowdown, not a cut, a slowdown. Well, they blew right through that. That was part of the Great Compromise, remember? Where are our fiscal conservatives? That was yesterday's podcast, Draining the Swamp. Are we draining the swamp? Where are the fiscal conservatives? $1 trillion deficits? Oh, well, Donald Trump's a Republican, so, as long as he's spending the money, it's okay. That's not going to cut it with me, folks. Because you didn't like it when Obama was doing it, and rightly so. You won't like it if Elizabeth Warren becomes the president and does it. You won't like it if crazy Bernie becomes president and is spending $1 trillion deficits. You're not going to like it. So why do you tolerate it when it's your guy? That's the problem, folks. You have to open your eyes. You have to pay attention. You're being swindled here. You got a Treasury Secretary from Goldman Sachs. The former acting Secretary of Defense was an executive from Boeing. Then the acting secretary was from Raytheon. Now he's just been appointed and confirmed as the Secretary of Defense. That's the military-industrial complex. They're making record profits. The banking institutions, banks, financial institutions are making record profits. We don't demonize profits here, but when you're going to say, as a politician, when your mandate is going to be draining the swamp, and you have the military-industrial complex in full swing and the banking sector in full swing, ladies and gentlemen, that's the swamp. They're doing just dandy. You had tax cuts, but you have an increase in spending. So thanks for the increase in pay today, only to take it out of my other pocket tomorrow. Net, that's not good. Cut spending. You want solutions? We talk about them here all the time. And they are simple in language, but is the system going to allow it? Is the machine going to allow it? No, because I am talking about destroying the machine. I am talking about starving the beast. Abolish the Federal Reserve and abolish the federal income tax. Then you will start to see magnificent economic growth. Will it be bumpy for a little bit as things get settled? Of course. But we'll be so much better on the other side, it won't even be funny. We'll continue to talk about that. But just getting back to the Mueller hearing, that to me is the most interesting thing. Why didn't Bob Mueller and his office really get to the heart of the genesis of this investigation? That's the serious question in all of this. Because this president, Donald Trump, is not going to be indicted. Not while he's in office. We stated it here the other day. Attorney General Bill Barr said it best in his testimony before the Senate Judiciary Committee. We have an election coming up. If you don't like Donald Trump, don't vote for him. Paraphrasing, but that's what he said. It's fantastic. That's how the system works. Because Attorney General Bill Barr is not going to indict him. So we'll keep you posted on what comes of this. But I have to agree with the Democrats. No one is above the law. Let's see if it comes down on their side, if they agree with that statement. The S&P 500 gained 14 points today. The Dow Jones Industrial Average lost 79 points. The Nasdaq gained 70, an increase of about 0.9%. The Russell 2000, the small cap index, was on a tear, gaining 25.5 points, or a 1.6% increase for the day. The Dow Jones Transports gained 0.5% today, and the New York Stock Exchange was up 0.3%. Oil, little changed on the day, trading at $56 for WTI. Brent, the international benchmark, is trading at $63.50. Gold and silver are still in relative position from where they were yesterday. Gold is now trading at $1,423 an ounce. Silver, meanwhile, is at $16.57 an ounce. For those of you who may just be joining us, precious metals, in my opinion, are greatly undervalued, particularly that of silver. Buy low, sell high, ladies and gentlemen. If you don't want the physical precious metals in your hand, that's fine. Get the stocks, get the gold and silver miners. There's GLD, the ETFs. There's SLV, the ETFs. Get some exposure to some of these things in your portfolio to be diversified. Uncle Sam's U.S. 10-year Treasury was down about 1% today, is now yielding 2.05%. Remember, folks, we are on the back here, or the beginning, cusp, I should say, of an easing cycle. The ECB meets tomorrow. We're going to hear what they have to say. Most definitely going to be to the downside. And then we have the Federal Reserve meeting next week with their conclusion on next Wednesday, with, of course, the markets anticipating at least a 25 basis point interest rate cut. It was only 7 months ago, almost 8 months ago now, that they were going to be hiking several times throughout this year. Now, despite the fact that their dual mandate of full employment and stable prices has been fulfilled, and stock markets are making all-time highs, why do we need to cut interest rates? This makes absolutely no sense whatsoever if you just look at the headlines and if you just listen to Donald Trump and his administration telling us that this is the best U.S. economy ever. It doesn't work that way, folks. You don't have it both ways. You don't have it both ways. If you can run a marathon, you don't need crutches. So it's what it is. And in fact, lower interest rates and quantitative easing is far worse than crutches. It's the disease. It's the thing that's going to paralyze us. So the Dow was the odd man out because Caterpillar and Boeing both surprised to the downside. Some bigger losses. Forward guidance wasn't fantastic. But surprisingly, if you look at Boeing, Boeing is still reeling from the 737 MAX crisis there with those two planes going down earlier and still having some major issues with that plane. But I believe that this was the worst quarter in Boeing's history, quarter over quarter. So one would expect that the stock really would have tanked. Now, it dropped a few percent, but this is a stock that is $350, almost $400, depending on the day. One would expect and anticipate this kind of a drop. A huge drop. Far greater than 2-3% from what it experienced today. Why do you think that is? Could it be because it's part of the military-industrial complex? I don't want to sound conspiratorial here, folks, but this is just the evidence. This is just an observation. Because we have a president of the United States who has taken ownership of the stock market, who praises himself, pats himself on the back, and tweets it out. Thank you, Mr. President. What does this mean? Does this mean he's controlling the levers behind the scenes? Because if this was any other company outside of the Dow Jones, or definitely outside of the military-industrial complex, it would have tanked. It would have tanked. But you can't have this stock tank because it's a major component of the Dow Jones Industrial Average. It's only 30 stocks. And Boeing's one of them. And it's a big component. And had Boeing tanked, like one would reasonably expect that it would have, you would have seen a major sell-off. Not just in the Dow, but it probably would have brought everybody else down with it. Something ain't right, folks. We see it in the data, and I can just feel it. It's just a gut feeling. You had Facebook report earnings after the bell. They beat expectations. They were up in after-hours trading. Tesla, not so good. Not so good. They surprised to the downside, and they were trading down considerably in after-hours trading. Ford, while they beat expectations, their forward guidance was not so pretty. So Ford was also trading down a few percentage points. Actually, I think it was close to 7% in after-hours trading. I mean, it's a $10 stock, $9 stock, but nevertheless, 7%, it's all relative. 7% is a big drop. But we'll see what happens tomorrow. And then we also had, over the past couple of days, we had UPS report. And UPS had a good number, gave good forward guidance. Actually, that was this morning already that they reported. And they were on a tear. They were up, I think, at one point during the day, 9%. That's huge. That is something that I would have expected to see from Boeing in the reverse. I would have expected Boeing to almost drop 9%, given how crazy the market is and how big of a drop, how big of a loss that they recorded. But nope, they just sustained 2-3% decrease, which is still big, but not when you have a record blowout like that, a record blowout to the downside. But sticking with the transports, because UPS, they exceeded just by a little bit, yet they rallied 9%. I mean, you can't make heads or tails of this market. This is absolutely crazy. But then on the other side, you have Norfolk Southern, the railroad. They were down a few percentage points today. So it's just a mixed bag across the board. Because at one point during the day, I believe the Dow Jones Transports was up nearly 1%. But as I just read to you, it closed up just 0.5%. And that was on the back, really, of Norfolk Southern, dragging it down. And again, the reason, especially those of you who may just be joining for the first time, the reason we go through this rundown, it's not random. These are things that we like to talk about, but these are obviously the major indices. But the reason why we talk about the Dow Jones Transports is because of the Dow theory, which states that it should be a leading indicator, a good indicator to pay attention to the transportation sector, because that's the sector that moves people and goods around from point A to point B. And so it's logical to assume that if there is higher volume being moved around from points A to B, that the economy is booming, it's in full stride, this, that, or the other. You can sort of predict or have a better understanding of where we are in the business cycle. And of course, counter to that, if there is low volume of people and product being moved from points A to B, then perhaps the economy is slowing down. So it's very reasonable. It stands the test of time. However, we are in a market mania. We are in a central bankers mania, and they are just getting set to print more money. Stock markets around the world, some of them at all-time highs. The U.S. markets are at all-time highs. The Australian markets are making all-time highs. The New Zealand stock market is making all-time highs. The Nikkei, the Japanese market, while it's way, way off of its all-time highs, I think it just hit an 11-week high today. So, I mean, why do we need to print more money? What's going on? What do they know that we don't know? I think we know what they know. We talk about it here all the time. There's too much debt. There's too much debt. The consumer is tapped out. The consumer we are being told that the consumer is strong. Who's telling us that? Bankers. The same bankers that are charging them 25% interest on their credit cards and are getting paid 25% on those credit cards because people are tapped out. They're living paycheck to paycheck. We know 1/4 of Americans are using credit cards to make ends meet. This is not good, ladies and gentlemen. Getting back to Ford, is it any surprise that their forward guidance was negative? When we have 7 million Americans 90 days plus past due on their auto loans? This is not good. This is where these bubbles take place. You know, that we somewhat learned our lesson with subprime in the housing market a decade ago, and then you obviously have some regulations placed on how you're going to make those underwriting decisions as to whether or not you're going to give those people, once again, loans. And so the money has to go somewhere else. It went to the auto sector. It went to people who were going to be buying cars. It went into corporate debt. That's where it's at. It's back in the housing market, too, at the higher end. And now, because where you're, again, awash in liquidity, the bankers are once again, and the shadow banking system is once again getting around the regulations, changing the way that credit scores are calculated. So people who were formerly subprime are now near prime or prime. And so more loans are going out to these people. Their situation hasn't gotten better. They've just changed the definition so they can get around the regulation. It's what we talk about here all the time. Regulations deal with the previous problem. They don't deal with the next one. Okay? So we have to be very aware of corporate balance sheets and the amount of debt that exists in corporate America. When you talk about some of the largest names out there in the Dow, because you're talking about some of the 30 largest companies in America, when you're talking about the S&P 500, the 500 largest companies, this, that, and the other, these companies, a lot of them generate a lot of cash. And they have good relationships with their banks. Okay? They can get access to capital if they need it. Now, that doesn't mean they all will, because you could have a credit freeze. But my point is, they're going to have easier access to capital. Plus, they're very highly linked with their political system. They're joined at the hip with Washington, D.C. So they'll get bailed out. Mid caps, small caps, they're not going to get bailed out. And they're the ones with most debt and the least amount of cash flow. So that's not a good recipe. In fact, that's a recipe for disaster, and that will start to kickstart an increase in unemployment. Because paying off your debts, that's a contract. You have to pay off your debts. You got to make those bond payments. And so when it comes down to it, a business decision, we got to continue to pay these bond payments, or we got to continue to make these loans to the bank, because if we don't, they're going to seize our assets. They're going to put a lien on our business. They're going to sue us. Our credit rating's going to go down the toilet. And anytime we want to go borrow money, it's going to cost us more because we're now deemed a higher risk. So what's going to happen? You're going to lay people off. And that's going to kickstart this whole cycle. That's what's going to happen. So there's a lot going on. Be mindful of the central bank news that is going to come out tomorrow from the ECB. What the markets are anticipating is language that is going to indicate that the ECB is going to continue their easing cycle beginning in September. Although there are some that are anticipating that even in tomorrow's meeting they might announce that they are going to cut their interest rates even further. They're already in negative territory, completely decimating the European financial system, completely destroying it. That's why we talk about Deutsche Bank, which didn't report great numbers either, which is no surprise to us. So that could be the canary in the coal mine, but there's a ton of canaries out there, and they're not going to be flying around too much longer, if you catch my drift. And then next week, we're going to have our central bank, the Federal Reserve, talking. And again, everybody is anticipating a 25 basis point rate cut. I don't know what this is going to do, to be perfectly honest with you. We're told we have stable prices, full employment. Why are they doing this? Stock market's at record highs. What's going on? Is this a totally manipulated game that we're in? Is this the Matrix? Is this Sims? Is this just a simulation? I'm not joking around. Because we talk about all of the data points here on a daily basis. They're all deteriorating. They're all rolling over. U.S. factory activity stalls in July. I'm going to leave you guys with this. The IHS Markit U.S. Manufacturing PMI fell to 50 in July of this year, the lowest since September of 2009, and below market expectations of 51. Output contracted the most since August of 2009, and new work from abroad declined at the fastest pace since April of 2016, while employment dropped for the first time in 6 years. So again, folks, for those of you who may not be familiar with these numbers, the PMI, the Purchasing Managers Index, a reading of 50 is that's your line between contraction and expansion. Anything above 50 is expansionary. Anything below 50 is contraction. We're right at 50. Haven't been this low since September of 2009. That wasn't a fantastic year, if you remember. And the other thing that I just want to note in this, employment dropped for the first time in 6 years. And we're talking about manufacturing. 6 years. Donald Trump has only been the president for 2.5, 3 years. This is the first time that there has been an issue with employment in manufacturing in 6 years. So there's a little bit of a disconnect. Jobs were coming back. I'm not trying to give Obama credit, believe me. I don't like him at all. But this just goes to another point with how Donald Trump is such a great marketer. And how he just gets out there and talks and talks and talks and repeats and repeats and repeats, and people start to believe it. This is why we're going to start doing videos here, because I'm going to show you the data. I'm going to show you the graphs. Not that I'm trying to support Obama, but, you know, it just opens up the president to a lot of really easy shots if people just look beneath the surface. And that's what we do here at the Capital News, because we're supposed to hold everybody accountable, whether we like it or not. Thank you so much for joining me today, ladies and gentlemen. It's been a pleasure having you, as always. Please like, share, subscribe, and get the word out. And leave your comments. We do love hearing from you. This is the Capital News. I am Alex Koritis. Godspeed.